Remember, groups tend to outdo individuals on estimation tasks, but do they do so on other types of tasks? In other words, are two or more heads better than one? According to Steiner's findings, for additive tasks, that's where performance depends on the sum of members' contributions, the answer is yes. An example would be a memory task, right? For a conjunctive task, where the group is only as strong as its weakest link, the answer is no. An example would be a hiking group that's limited by their slowest member. And for disjunctive tasks, where success depends on a breakthrough, the answer is yes. An example of this would be problem solving. Yet, even with additive and disjunctive tasks, groups can still fall prey to many biases. What can mess them up? Let's look at that. One factor is social loafing. In the 1970s, a New England pickle factory found themselves in, well, a pickle. As the company grew and hired more pickle packers, those who stuffed pickles into jars, the inspectors, shall we call them the pickle police, increasingly had to send jars back. The more they hired, the more jars had to be sent back, because so many of them were packing pickles that were too small. They had been trained for this. Small pickles float and bob around unattractively, and they're supposed to select those out. Pickle packing productivity was proceeding poorly. But why, might you ask, should you give a gherkin about pickle packing? Because it paints a perfect picture of something called social loafing. Okay, I will stop the alliteration now. Social loafing is the tendency people have to exert less effort in a group than they do when working alone. Social loafing is also known as the free rider effect. The free rider effect because of those who take the subway honor system for granted by riding without a ticket. But there's one major flaw in that metaphor. Loafers are not always aware that they are loafing. In Ingham's rope study, blindfolded participants played tug-of-war with a rope pulling machine and were told that they were working alone or in a group. They exerted significantly less effort when they thought themselves to be working in a group. Likewise, in Latané's study, participants were asked to clap or cheer as loud as they could. When performing collectively, they loafed. The noise produced by each individual tended to decrease as the group size increased. Have you ever been assigned a group project in class and had to make up for one or more group members who were not doing their share? This is the reason, by the way, I do not assign group projects. I find that when such projects are assigned, the A and B students are extremely nervous. The C students couldn't care less, but the D and E students are thrilled, right? Also, loafing can be contagious. A single loafer can cause others in the group to loaf because no one wants to be a sucker doing all the work while someone else is goofing off. This tendency to also loaf because you don't want to feel like a sucker is called the sucker effect in social psychology. Stoner, an MIT graduate student back in the 60s, claimed in his master's thesis to find a risky shift in group decisions. The tendency for groups, in other words, to come to riskier decisions than the sum of members' individual opinions, which were taken before group discussion and consensus. However, further studies produced mixed results. Over time, it became clear that group polarization was what was really happening. Groups exaggerate the initial leanings of the members regardless of whether those initial leanings are cautious or risky. So Stoner wasn't necessarily stoned. He just happened to study groups that had an initial risky leaning. So it is that when groups of mostly right-winged members get together and have discussions, people come out with even more right-wing attitudes. Those with more left-wing members, more left-winged attitudes. What did the Bay of Pigs invasion, Vietnam War, and the Iraq War have in common? They were all colossal mistakes prompted by what Janice termed groupthink, when the pressure to concur overrides realistic appraisal. Groupthink. Groupthink on the part of both Saddam Hussein and George Bush contributed to the Iraq War. There is evidence they both surrounded themselves with like-minded advisors and silenced opposing voices, all to create a consensus based on false assumptions. Hussein assumed that the invading forces could be resisted. The U.S. assumed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that its people would welcome invading soldiers as liberators, and that, in short, peaceful occupation would lead to a thriving democracy. A specific kind of trap that can be very costly is known as escalating effects, and this is also known as entrapment. A construction project began in 1983 in Boston called The Big Dig. They kept running into unexpected problems, meaning unexpected expenses, and delays, but instead of abandoning the sinking ship, each year they decided to sink more into it. It ended up taking more than a decade to complete and went over the projected $2.6 billion budget by more than $21 billion. Obviously, the project never would have been undertaken had they known the final cost. Escalating effects occur when commitment to a failing course of action is increased to justify prior investments. Groups are even more vulnerable, by the way, to this trap than individuals. Have you ever been in a group where the only opinions considered were those expressed by the few loudest individuals? Underutilization occurs when groups do not identify and use all of their individual members' skills, talents, and knowledge, nor solicit and consider all of their opinions.